In the world of global politics, a single social media post can threaten to unravel decades of friendship and trillions of dollars in trade. And in late January 2026, a digital bombshell dropped, aimed squarely at America's closest ally. The message was blunt, aggressive, and signature Donald Trump. He threatened a crippling 100% tariff on all Canadian goods shipped to the United States, a move that would have been nothing short of an economic declaration of war, designed to bring the nation of Canada to its knees. But what Trump didn't see coming was the quiet, calculated, and devastatingly effective response. It was a move so subtle the world's media, hungry for a public shouting match, almost missed it entirely. This isn't a story about fighting fire with fire. It's the story of how Canada, facing an unprecedented existential threat, simply refused to play the game. It's the story of how they outmaneuvered the White House, neutralized its most powerful weapon, and quietly secured what amounts to a $20 billion victory, all while the man who made the threat was left fuming on the sidelines. So how did they pull it off? How did Canada manage to turn a potentially devastating economic blow into a masterclass in geopolitical strategy? The answer is a brilliant story of foresight, patience, and a deep understanding of the long game. It's a story that proves the loudest voice in the room doesn't always win the argument. Sometimes the victory goes to the smartest player on the board. To truly understand why this threat backfired so spectacularly, you first have to appreciate the sheer audacity of the weapon that was fired. On a weekend in late January 2026, President Donald Trump took to his platform Truth Social with a stark and brutal ultimatum. His post left absolutely no room for interpretation. If Canada makes a deal with China, he wrote, it will immediately be hit with a 100% tariff against all Canadian goods and products coming into the USA. This wasn't just talk. It was a cannonball aimed at the very foundation of the US-Canada relationship. A 100% tariff isn't just a tax. It's an economic blockade in all but name. It means that for every $1 widget a Canadian company sends stateside, an equal dollar is owed in taxes. It instantly doubles the price, making that product utterly uncompetitive overnight. For a country whose economy is so deeply intertwined with the United States, this was the economic nuclear option. Business leaders on both sides of the border were left stunned. The president of a chamber of commerce in New York warned that such a move was so reckless it could send the US itself spiraling into a recession. Simply because the two economies are not just connected, they are fused. The trigger for this extraordinary threat was a new and pointedly limited trade agreement between Canada and China. Following a visit to Beijing by Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, Canada had agreed to slash its own 100% tariffs on Chinese-made electric vehicles, tariffs that were originally put in place back in 2024 specifically to align with US policy. In exchange for this concession, China would lower its own tariffs on key Canadian agricultural exports like canola. The deal was carefully constructed. Canada would allow an initial cap of just 49,000 Chinese EVs into the country at a much lower 6.1% tariff. From Canada's point of view, this was simply pragmatic policy. It was about opening new markets for its struggling farmers and offering more affordable EV options to its own citizens. A national poll even suggested a majority of Canadians supported the deal, hoping it would finally make electric cars more accessible. But the White House saw it as a profound betrayal. In a follow-up post, Trump declared that if Prime Minister Mark Carney thinks he is going to make Canada a drop-off port for China to send goods and products into the United States, he is sorely mistaken. He accused Canada of intentionally opening a back door for Chinese goods, a narrative that perfectly fueled his long-running and deeply personal trade war with Beijing. This threat wasn't happening in a vacuum. It was the latest in a string of provocations. Trump had recently taken to calling the Prime Minister Governor Carney, a deliberately dismissive jab meant to imply Canada was little more than a US state. Tensions were also simmering over a separate dispute involving Canada's decision to buy military hardware from a Swedish company instead of an American one. The timing was also critical. This all exploded just as both nations were gearing up for a mandatory joint review of the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA, set for July 2026. This agreement is the very backbone of North American trade, and the review was already expected to be tense. Trump's tariff threat was seen by many observers as an aggressive, explosive opening move, a way to put Canada on the defensive before the critical talks even began. The stakes are almost impossibly high. Trade between the two nations is worth about $2 billion every single day. For countless industries, the border is less a political line and more a vital economic artery. The 100% threat was a direct move to sever that artery, a tactic designed to force an immediate submissive response from Ottawa. The world held its breath, waiting for Canada to either fold under the pressure or fire back with its own threats. In the end, Canada did neither. Faced with a threat that could shatter their economy, the Canadian government's response was a stunning study in strategic calm. There were no panic statements, no emergency press conferences, and no angry threats hurled back across the border. Instead, Ottawa executed a precise, disciplined, and devastatingly effective counterplay, one that analysts would later describe as meeting the White House's bluster with resolute firmness and measured calmness. The first move came from Prime Minister Mark Carney himself. Speaking to reporters, he didn't attack President Trump. He simply and calmly stated a basic economic fact. Any tariffs the US imposes would ultimately be paid by American consumers. He framed the issue as a matter of domestic stability, not an international brawl, stating that his government was focused on protecting Canadians, protecting our border, protecting our way of life, and supporting Canadians. It was a subtle but powerful way to reframe the entire narrative. This wasn't a fight between two leaders. It was a policy that would hurt American families at the checkout counter. Simultaneously, Carney's government began carefully dismantling the very premise of Trump's threat. While Trump was screaming about a massive free trade deal, Canadian Minister Dominic LeBlanc publicly and repeatedly clarified that it simply wasn't true. He stressed that Canada was not pursuing a comprehensive free trade agreement with China, something that would have major problematic implications under the USMCA. Instead, LeBlanc defined the deal for what it was: a limited, specific, and narrow arrangement designed to fix tariff issues in a few key sectors. In short, Canada was calmly telling the world, "There's nothing to see here. This is a minor tweak, not the major policy shift you're being told it is." This quiet, factual correction was a brilliant maneuver. It refused to get into the mud with Trump and denied him the public spectacle he so clearly wanted. While Trump was swinging a rhetorical sledgehammer, Canada was using a scalpel, carefully dissecting his argument and exposing it as a massive, deliberate overreaction. Prime Minister Carney further downplayed the threat by suggesting it was just posturing ahead of negotiations to renew the USMCA. By framing the 100% tariff as a predictable, if extreme, negotiating tactic, he robbed it of its power to shock and intimidate. It was a political masterstroke, akin to a chess player calmly looking across the board and telling their opponent, "I see your move, I anticipated it, and I'm not impressed." This strategy of avoiding retaliation in favor of calm defiance was a deliberate choice born from hard experience. Canada had seen this movie before. They had learned that responding to bluster with more bluster just leads to an escalatory spiral, something their economies simply couldn't afford. But the real reason they could afford to be so calm, the secret weapon behind their entire strategy, wasn't just clever rhetoric. It was a well-established, battle-tested playbook that had already proven it could inflict billions of dollars of targeted pain on the US economy if needed. The 100% threat was new, but Canada's response was built on the hard-won lessons of the past. So how does a calm diplomatic response translate into a stunning $20 billion victory? The secret is that the victory wasn't actually won in January 2026. The groundwork, the real source of Canada's power, was laid a year earlier in a series of powerful retaliatory moves that gave Canada the incredible leverage it was now using. That $20 billion figure isn't a new prize Canada won. It's the price tag of the counterpunch Canada had already proven it could and would deliver. To understand it, we have to rewind the clock to February 1, 2025. That's the day the Trump administration launched a massive broadside attack on Canadian trade. Citing a list of grievances, Trump announced sweeping new tariffs, a staggering 25% on most Canadian goods and 10% on Canadian energy products. This was a huge escalation designed to damage the Canadian economy and force major concessions. At the time, Canada's response under then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was anything but quiet. It was immediate, forceful, and massive. Trudeau announced that Canada would retaliate with 25% tariffs of its own, targeting an initial $30 billion dollars worth of American goods. At the time, that was equivalent to about 20.6 billion US dollars, and that is the origin of our $20 billion figure. It wasn't money Canada won, it was the value of American exports that Canada immediately and credibly put in the crosshairs. It was a clear dollar-for-dollar message sent to Washington. For every blow you land on us, we will land one of equal or greater value on you. But Canada didn't stop there. The government warned that if the dispute continued, the retaliation would expand to cover a staggering $155 billion in U.S. goods after just 3 weeks. This was not a bluff. When the U.S. tariffs officially took effect on March 4, 2025, Canada's went into effect the very same day. The first wave, that $20.6 billion salvo, was officially fired. This powerful response established what is known in geopolitics as credible deterrence. Canada proved it wasn't a passive punching bag. It had the will and the ability to take a hit and deliver an incredibly painful one in return. That $20 billion retaliation wasn't just a number. It was a show of force that would echo into every future negotiation. It represented the price of defending its economic sovereignty. The win was showing the world that the cost of bullying Canada would be unacceptably high for the United States. So when President Trump issued his 100% tariff threat in January 2026, the context was completely different. The new Canadian government under Prime Minister Carney could afford to be calm because the White House threat wasn't abstract anymore. Everyone knew exactly what Canada's response would look like because they had seen it before, or rather, they had seen the $20 billion playbook in action. 100% tariff, as shocking as it sounded, was less credible because the retaliation it would provoke would be catastrophic for the US. If a 25% tariff triggered a $20 billion response, what would a 100% tariff trigger? The numbers would be astronomical. And that powerful strategy wasn't even invented in 2025. It was a refined, scaled-up version of a playbook Canada first developed years earlier. Canada's multi-billion-dollar strategy wasn't a gamble. It was a tested formula perfected back in 2018 during the first major trade battle with the Trump administration. It all started in March 2018 when Trump announced plans to impose tariffs on steel and aluminum from around the world, citing national security. After initially exempting Canada, the administration abruptly changed course, and on June 1, 2018, a 25% tariff on Canadian steel and 10% on aluminum came into force. For Canada, this was a direct assault. The response was swift and decisive. On July 1, 2018, Canada struck back, imposing its own dollar-for-dollar retaliatory tariffs on $16.6 billion worth of U.S. exports. But here's where the genius of their strategy was truly revealed. They didn't just tax random American products. They turned retaliation into a form of political warfare. The list of targeted goods was a masterwork of political calculation. Of course, it included American steel and aluminum, but it also included a long, eclectic list of other products: coffee, strawberry jam, toilet paper, and most famously, ketchup and American whiskey. These items were not chosen by accident. They were selected for maximum political impact. The goal wasn't just to inflict economic pain, but to direct that pain towards specific, politically sensitive areas in the United States. Tariffs on Kentucky bourbon were a direct shot at the home state of then Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. Tariffs on products like orange juice from Florida were aimed at a key electoral swing state. It was a surgical strike. Canada was using its retaliatory power to turn up the political heat on key Republicans, hoping they would in turn pressure the White House to back down. As then Foreign Minister Chrystia Freeland perfectly summed it up, we will not escalate and we will not back down. And it was incredibly effective. It created powerful, angry lobbying pressure from US industries that suddenly found themselves on the front lines of a trade war they never wanted. The Distilled Spirits Council of the United States became a vocal opponent, highlighting how American distilleries were being crippled. Warehouses in the US filled up with whiskey that was destined for Canada but now had nowhere to go. Data shows just how well it worked. After the tariffs hit, Canada's imports of the targeted US products plummeted. Imports of US steel, for instance, fell by over 30% on average. The strategy ultimately succeeded. In May 2019, the US and Canada announced a deal to lift the tariffs on both sides. The ketchup and whiskey war was a crucial dress rehearsal. It taught Canada three vital lessons: that dollar-for-dollar retaliation works, that targeting politically sensitive goods is an incredibly powerful tool, and that Canada had the economic resilience to withstand a trade skirmish and win. This experience gave them the confidence and the playbook they would later deploy on a much larger scale in 2025. They were ready. When you connect all the dots, a clear picture emerges. Trump's 100% tariff threat wasn't some brilliant chess move. It was a desperate gambit that was destined to fail, not because of a single clever move in 2026, but because of the foundation of deterrence Canada had painstakingly built for years. The number one reason the threat failed is that it simply wasn't credible. A threat is only as powerful as your opponent's belief that you'll actually carry it out. And by 2026, Canada simply didn't believe the US could survive the consequences of its own threat. Think about it from their perspective. They had seen the chaos caused by the limited steel and aluminium tariffs in 2018. They had seen the political pressure mount on the White House from its own party. And most importantly, they had already designed and executed a devastatingly effective $20.6 billion retaliatory strike in 2025. They had the list, they had the plan, they had proven they would use it. A 100% tariff on all Canadian goods would have invited a response that would have dwarfed anything seen before. The US economy would have been thrown into chaos. The automotive supply chain, where parts can cross the border multiple times before a single car is finished, would grind to a halt. Prices for American consumers would skyrocket on everything from food to building materials. As those business leaders had warned, it could trigger a deep US recession. The Canadian government knew this, and they knew the Trump administration knew it too. The threat was political theater, not a serious policy proposal. The second factor was the USMCA itself. While Trump often rails against trade deals, the USMCA has dispute resolution mechanisms that provide stability. A unilateral 100% tariff would have violated the very agreement Trump himself championed as one of his key achievements. With the 6-year review looming in July 2026, blowing up the entire deal beforehand would have been an incredibly self-destructive move. Third, Canada's diplomatic strategy was perfectly tailored to the situation. By refusing to get into a war of words, Prime Minister Carney's government denied Trump the confrontation he feeds on. Trump's entire style relies on creating a clear enemy and a public spectacle. Canada just refused to play along. Their calm, measured response made Trump's aggression look erratic and unreasonable on the world stage. They won the battle for international opinion simply by being the adult in the room. The backfire, then, wasn't that the tariffs were imposed and failed. The backfire was that the threat itself failed to achieve its primary goal, to intimidate Canada into submission. It failed to stop the China deal. It failed to make Carney's government panic, and it failed to give Trump any real leverage for the upcoming USMCA talks. In fact, it did the opposite. By overplaying his hand so dramatically, Trump revealed the profound weakness of his own position. The quiet win for Canada was the powerful reaffirmation of its economic sovereignty. It was the moment Ottawa proved once and for all that it would not be dictated to by its larger neighbor. The victory wasn't a $20 billion pot of gold. It was the successful defense of its national interest, made possible by the credible threat of a $20 billion retaliation. So when the dust finally settled, who was the real winner in this high-stakes game of economic chess? On the surface, it might look like a draw. No new tariffs were imposed in the end. Canada's deal with China proceeded as a limited agreement. The two economies remain deeply, unbreakably intertwined. But to see it that way misses the profound shift this whole episode revealed. The clear strategic winner was Canada. Think about the flow of events. President Trump deployed his ultimate weapon, a public threat to completely sever the economic relationship. It was meant to be checkmate. Instead, Canada responded with a calm, unflinching defense of its sovereign right to trade with whomever it chooses. Prime Minister Mark Carney's simple declaration that Canada thrives because we are Canadian was the perfect summary of this newfound confidence. That confidence wasn't arrogance. It was earned through experience. It was rooted in the battle-tested playbook from 2018 and 2025. The ghost of that $20.6 billion retaliation loomed over the entire affair, a silent but immensely powerful deterrent. Canada had successfully called Trump's bluff, not with a loud counter-threat, but with the quiet, unshakable knowledge that its past actions spoke louder than any of Trump's words ever could. The backfire for the White House was total. The threat failed to achieve its goal. It exposed the absolute limits of the maximum pressure strategy, and it arguably weakened the U.S. negotiating position ahead of the crucial USMCA review. Canada, having stared down this ultimate threat, could walk into those talks with what one analyst called tremendous leverage and clout. They had proven their resilience. So Canada's quiet win isn't measured in a lump sum of $20 billion. The win is far more significant. It's the establishment of a new, more balanced power dynamic in the US-Canada relationship. It's proof that a so-called middle power can, through smart strategic action, defend its interests against a superpower. It's the knowledge that Canada has a proven multi-billion-dollar response ready to go, and the wisdom to know that the threat of using it is often more powerful than the action itself. This story, however, isn't over. The fundamental tensions are still there. The critical review of the USMCA in July 2026 will force all three North American partners to decide the future of the continent's trade. The ultimate question is a profound one. Has the era of strong-arm trade diplomacy been neutralized by a smarter, quieter playbook? Canada's experience suggests it has. They've shown that it's possible to stand up to a bully, not by shouting back, but by calmly showing you know exactly how to hit them where it hurts. In the complex world of 21st century trade, the loudest voice may no longer command the most respect. The real power may now lie with those who have mastered the art of the quiet win. What are your thoughts on this high-stakes game of economic chicken? Did Canada play its hand perfectly, or was it a risky gamble? Who do you think holds the better cards heading into the critical USMCA review? I want to hear what you think, so leave your analysis and opinions in the comments section below. I read as many as I can, and your insights help shape the entire conversation. If you're finding this deep dive into the strategies of economic statecraft as fascinating as I do, and you believe it's crucial to understand the real stories behind the headlines, then do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. We unpack complex global events like this every single week to show you how the world really works. And if you're getting value from this analysis, please click the like button. It really helps the channel and allows us to bring this kind of in-depth reporting to more people.